I never carried Mark in my womb. That truth lived in my chest like a small sharp stone I swallowed every morning. I could feel it when I breathed, when I smiled, when I tucked the blanket around his narrow shoulders at night. He was 6 years old. The day I first walked into Jacob's house as the new wife. The living room still smelled of the old Life jasmine perfume that no longer had a wearer. Children's drawings taped to the fridge with "For Mommy" written in wobbly crayon. Jacob had warned me, he doesn't talk much. Don't push him. Mark sat on the floor, legs crossed, hugging a faded blue stuffed rabbit, whose ear was half chewed off. His eyes, dark like his father's, but softer, flicked up to me once, then returned to the toy. "Hi Mark," I said gently, crouching so I wouldn't tower over him. "I'm Anna." He didn't answer. He simply stared at the space between my eyebrows, as if I were a strange piece of furniture that had suddenly appeared. Jacob cleared his throat. "She's going to live with us now, buddy." Still nothing. That night, after Jacob fell asleep, I stood in the hallway outside Mark's room and listened to him whispering to the rabbit. "See Lang," he kept saying, "her, not Tita, not 8. Certainly not Mama, just her. The replacement." I cried in the shower so no one would hear. I had met Jacob 8 months after his first wife. Elena passed away from cancer. He was broken in the way only a widower with a small child can be: polite, responsible, but empty. I was 31, single, a kindergarten teacher who believed I still had time to have my own children. Love came slowly, like a tide that didn't ask permission. One dinner turned into 2, then into quiet evenings where I helped him sort Elena's clothes for donation. I told myself I wasn't trying to replace her. I was only trying to help 2 people who were drowning. But the first time Jacob kissed me, I saw the guilt in his eyes. And when he proposed 6 months later, I said yes, knowing I would always be second. The wedding was small. Mark wore a tiny black suit and refused to hold my hand during the family photos. When the photographer asked him to call me Mama Anna for the picture, he shook his head and walked away. Jacob apologized later. I told him it was fine, it wasn't fine. But it was the bargain I had made. For the first year, I kept my distance emotionally, even while I did everything a mother does. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. to make his bayonne rice, chicken adobo, sliced mango, because he hated cafeteria food. I learned how to iron the pleats on his school uniform so the teacher wouldn't scold him. When he had a fever of 39 degrees one rainy night, I stayed on the floor beside his bed, wiping his forehead with a cool cloth, while Jacob snored in the next room. Mark never thanked me. He never complained either. He simply existed in my presence like a quiet shadow. On Mother's Day that first year, his school held a program. I sat in the back row wearing the yellow dress Jacob liked, clutching a small bouquet I had bought for myself. Other children ran to their mothers with handmade cards. Mark stood alone on stage, eyes scanning the audience until they found me. For 1 second, our gazes locked. Then he looked away. I went home and locked myself in the bathroom so Jacob wouldn't see me cry. That night I asked myself the question that would haunt me for the next 12 years. Do I have the right to feel hurt? I was not his mother. I was the woman who came after. The panicky, the patch, the extra. I had no answer. 3 years passed like that, slow, careful stitches in a fabric I wasn't sure would hold. Mark turned 9. He grew taller but stayed thin, all elbows and knees. His voice was still soft, almost whispery. He still called me Sia when he needed something. But now it was accompanied by a small gesture, a tug on my sleeve instead of words. I became an expert in the language of Mark. I knew that when he ate the edges of his toast first, he was anxious about a test. When he lined up his toy cars in perfect rows after school, something at recess had upset him. When he left his bedroom door open a crack at night, he wanted me to check on him without having to ask. I never told Jacob how much those tiny signs meant to me. I was afraid he would feel guilty for the love I was stealing in secret. One afternoon in grade 4, Mark came home with a black eye. A bigger boy had pushed him and called him motherless. I cleaned the cut above his eyebrow with trembling hands. "Who did this?" I asked. He shrugged. "Doesn't matter." I wanted to march to the school and scream at the principal, at the other boys' parents, at the universe. Instead, I made him his favorite champorado and sat with him while he ate in silence. When he finished, he pushed the empty bowl toward me and said the closest thing to gratitude I had ever heard. See ya. My heart cracked open and healed in the same second. That Christmas, Jacob and I gave him a new stuffed rabbit, identical to the old one, but without the chewed ear. Mark looked at it for a long time, then placed the old rabbit gently inside the new one's arms like a baby. He slept with both that night. I stood in the doorway watching him, tears blurring my vision. I started keeping a secret journal, not for anyone else, just for me. Every night I wrote one line. Today, Mark, let me hug him for 3 seconds. Today, he said goodnight. See ya instead of nothing. Today, he waited for me to pick him up instead of walking home alone. The journal grew thick. The stone in my chest grew lighter, but never disappeared. He was 11 when the nightmare happened. It was 2:17 a.m. when I heard the scream. I ran barefoot down the hall and found Mark thrashing in his bed, drenched in sweat, eyes wide open but seeing nothing. Ma, don't go, he sobbed. I froze at the doorway. Elena's face flashed in my mind, the photos still hanging in the hallway, her smile frozen forever at 33. Was he calling her? I almost turned away, but then he whimpered again, smaller this time, like a lost child. Ma. I walked to the bed. My hand hovered above his hair for a second before I let it rest there. I'm here, I whispered. Andito laying his small hand shot out and grabbed the front of my knife. He buried his face in my chest like I was the only solid thing left in the world. His body shook with sobs. I held him until the shaking stopped, until his breathing evened out, until he whispered one last time, half asleep, Ma. Stay. I stayed until morning light crept through the curtains. Then I slipped out, went to the bathroom, and cried so hard my ribs hurt. I cried for the boy who had lost his real mother. I cried for the woman I would never be. And I cried because, for one night, I had been enough. High school changed everything. Mark turned 14, and suddenly the world noticed he had no real mother. The comments grew sharper. The stairs in the hallway longer. One afternoon I picked him up from school and heard him snap at his classmates. You're not my real mom, okay? Stop pretending. The words landed like a slap across my face in front of 20 teenagers. My lips trembled. I forced a smile anyway. I know, I said softly. I'll wait in the car. The drive home was silent. When we arrived, he slammed the door and disappeared into his room. I didn't follow. I cooked dinner, set the table and waited. At midnight I heard him crying, not loud, but the kind of crying that comes from shame and anger twisted together. I stood outside his door with my hand on the knob for 10 full minutes before I walked away. That night I wrote in my journal, he is growing up. And growing up means he has to choose who he wants to be. Maybe he will never choose me. I found Elena's diary by accident. 2 months later, Jacob had asked me to clear out the old storage boxes in the garage. A worn leather journal slipped from between old photo albums and fell open at my feet. The handwriting was elegant, hurried, full of pain. I made a mistake. The baby might not be Jacob's. I was lonely. He was kind. I don't know how to tell him. I'm dying anyway. Maybe it's better if he never knows. My knees gave out. I sat on the cold concrete floor among boxes of someone else's life and read every page until the sun went down. I never told Jacob. I never told Mark. Some secrets are kinder when they stay buried. Mark was 17. When the envelope arrived, he came home early, face pale, eyes red. Without a word he handed me the paper. DNA test result, paternity exclusion, 99.9999%. Jacob was not his biological father. The room spun. I had to sit down. Mark's voice cracked when he finally spoke. Did Mama know? I couldn't lie anymore. Not completely. She suspected, I whispered. He screamed then. Not at me, at the universe. I don't have a father. I don't have a mother. What the hell am I? I watched a 6-year-old boy return in the body of a young man. I crossed the room and held his shoulders the way I had when he was small. You have a mother, I said. He laughed bitterly. You? Yes, I answered, voice steady even though my heart was breaking. I may not have given birth to you, but I chose you every single day for 11 years. He cried like the world was ending. Then he hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. Can I call you Mama? He whispered into my shoulder. Even if it's not real. You've been my son longer than you know, I told him, tears falling freely now. You just didn't know it yet. 18 came too fast. The biological father, a wealthy businessman named Raphael, found Mark through the DNA test company. He arrived at our house in a black SUV, wearing an expensive watch and an even more expensive smile. I want to make things right, he told Mark in our living room. Come live with me. I can give you the life you deserve, university abroad, a car, connections. Then he looked at me. She's not even your real mother, son. She's just the second wife. The words cut deeper than I expected. Mark was quiet for a long time. He looked at Jacob, who had aged 10 years in the last hour. He looked at me. Raphael extended his hand. Let's go. You don't owe these people anything. 1 second. 2 seconds. Mark stepped backward and took my arm instead. She is my mother, he said, voice clear and strong. She came into our lives late, but she stayed when everyone else left. She packed my lunches, washed my clothes, stayed up when I was sick, and loved me even when I couldn't love her back. He looked Raphael straight in the eye. You may share my blood, but she poured her life into mine. I won't go anywhere unless she comes with me. Jacob cried quietly. In the corner, I couldn't speak. Raphael left without another word. That night Mark sat on the edge of my bed like he used to. When he was small, Mama, he said, no hesitation, no whisper, no mistake. The word filled the room like sunlight after a long storm. Yes, Aina, I answered, voice thick. He took my hand exactly the way he had on that custody day years ago. I chose you a long time ago, he said. I was just too scared to say it out loud. I'm sorry it took me so long. I pulled him into my arms and held the boy who was never mine by blood, but was mine by every other measure that mattered. Mark is 24 now. He still calls me Mama in front of friends, in front of his girlfriend, even in front of Jacob when we all have Sunday lunch together. The blue rabbit still sits on his shelf, now joined by a newer one I bought him when he graduated college. Sometimes people ask how I became his mother. I tell them the truth. Mark is not my child. I never carried him in my womb, but on the day he had to choose who he would go with, he held my hand. And every time I say it, the small stone in my chest turns into something warm and bright. Love doesn't always begin in the womb. Sometimes it begins with a quiet boy who calls you Sia for 6 long years, and ends with a young man who chooses you in front of the whole world. I'm not Mark's first mother, but I am the only mother he ever chose. And that, I finally understand, is more than enough, Ma.